Hello and welcome back to the Boston Sprinter route in TSW2. This time, and since I did a run down to Stoughton yesterday, today we're going to do the return trip using the CTC-3 cab car with this F40PH-3C at the back. This is of course an MBTA service. And obviously I have just closed the doors. So obviously we're pretty much ready to go, and I think all I need to do now is... oh well, I've obviously got to put the reverser in. Right, that hissing, the brakes is a bit annoying. That's going away, so that's not too much of a problem. Yeah, this is MBTA train 914. Well, Providence / Stoughton line, train 914. It is the 16:29 or 4:29 PM Stoughton to Boston South service, although as you can see I am leaving a bit late. And yeah, this service is interesting because it doesn't stop at Canton Junction. Yeah, so we'll only be calling at Canton Center, Route 128, Boston Back Bay and Boston South. Yeah, I find it quite strange that this service isn't scheduled to call at Canton Junction, since all the other Stoughton services I've run have stopped there. Now, that's one thing I don't like about this service, is this 10 mph speed restriction into and out of Stoughton. It's curious. Look at what happens with the ditch lights when you blast the horn. It's funny how they stop flashing as soon as you take your key off the or hand off the horn lever. It does that with the locomotive as well. Brakes, but still put the cab lights on. Right, I think I did just see a thing on the HUD saying that the speed limit is going up to 40 miles an hour soon. And obviously then we can get it up to a bit more speed, although even then I'm pretty sure we won't make it to Canton Center on time. Should be annoying, because I dare say in real life a service like this, especially since at this point it's like late in the afternoon, would be trying to get back to Boston as quickly as possible to get people, or to get like evening commuters. Yeah, those hissing brakes are really annoying. Of course, the damn sound is still playing. That's better. Oh, for God's sake. Never mind. Probably not a good idea to put on too much power, especially since we're going down a 1 in 100 grade, or 1 in 101, and it would be a lot easier to pick up speed. But no, I'm mainly doing this run because I wanted to try and do something fairly quick today, since unfortunately I've only got the time to do one video. But I like to think that I'll be putting up more videos tomorrow, or in obviously all the other days. But one thing I know for certain is that I will be doing another video on this Boston Sprinter route when that when that update comes out that brings in the Phase 3 / TSW advert livery for the ACS-64. It's kind of curious how, I find it interesting how there's quite a lot of level crossings on the Stoughton branch, and yet once you get onto the Northeast Corridor there are no level crossings at all. Although I dare say that, I mean, obviously this is just a branch line, and when you're on the section you can't really go any faster than 40 miles an hour. But yeah, this sort of run from Stoughton to Boston and vice versa is quite fascinating because of just how different the branch line is from the NEC. In fact, I've just realised that since this time we're not stopping at Hyde Park or Ruggles, we might actually be able to get up to 100 miles an hour once we've left Route 128. I don't know why that brake lever makes that horrible hissing noise every time you move it. Yes, I still haven't really got to grips all that much with this sort of driving the MBTA consist from the cab car end. And I always find myself fudging the stopping points when I'm driving from this end, and yet it seems to do a lot better when I'm actually in the locomotive. I think it's like, it seems to be a bit like what I do with, like whenever I'm driving a Caltrain service. Although since I hardly drive on that route, I can't really say. But what I will say is that, yeah, I don't usually drive on the Peninsula Corridor route, even though, as much as I like it, I just think the Caltrain timetable and the trains, they take far too long to cover that 47-mile section. Although, I dare say it is because of all the station stops there to make, especially if it's like one of the limited stop or local services. And compared to that lot, I think the Baby Bullets have it easy. Since of course the Baby Bullet is meant to be an express service. Though saying that, it's not really that much of an express when limited to a top speed of 79 miles an hour, and I think there's only 2 places on the route where faster trains can overtake slower ones. They are stations at Bayshore and Lawrence. Right, so we're less than a mile out from Canton Center, so I suppose I could have started putting on the brakes sooner, but well, I suppose it's better to be safe than sorry. Actually, here's a thought. Have any of you watching ever actually... Thank you, Messenger Ping. Have any of you ever actually gone to the Boston area and ridden on the MBTA trains in real life? Like more specifically on the Stoughton branch. Because I'm curious to know, because I've obviously never been there myself, so I'm curious to know how accurate the Dovetail's rendition is. Because from what I've seen, or what I've experienced so far, I think Boston Sprinter is certainly one of the best US routes in the game. Even though, as always, there's plenty of route, there's a lot of route extensions that I think really should be made. And I'm going to get away from that bloody brake lever before it does my head in. But yeah, I think even though it's very linear with only this one piddly little branch line, I do still think that it is one of the better, if not best, routes that Dovetail have done for TSW. Although saying that, it's not really one for those who prefer. It's not really one for those who prefer freight over passenger trains, especially since even though there are like freight wagons or like CSX freight wagons at a few yards throughout the route, you can't actually there's no timetable services for the CSX equipment. Right, so as we leave Canton Center, I see that there's obviously a red signal, and presumably that would mean that even though the schedule says that we're not meant to stop for passengers at Canton Junction, I have a feeling that we might end up having to stop there anyway to allow for a faster train to pass by. That's the other thing. How accurate is this horn sound for the CTC-3 cab car? Personally, I think it just doesn't sound anywhere near as good as the horn on the locomotive. And that goes for the ACS-64 as well. Speaking of things like cab cars, I know that Amtrak have a sizable number of old Bud Metroliner coaches that they had converted into cab cars, and I don't really remember where they run, but I'm just wondering if any of them actually are used in like the Northeast Regional, or is it just or is it always locomotive hauled with like the ACS-64s? I mean, I think in all the footage I've seen from like the real Boston South, I've never seen any cab cars on the Amtrak trains. So I know that Amtrak services generally don't use cab cars. I mean, I think you can see some of the old Metroliner cars. I think is it like a New Haven to Springdale shuttle, or is it, no, Springfield? Isn't there like a shuttle from, or like an Amtrak shuttle from like New Haven to Springfield that uses a locomotive and a cab car? Pretty sure it's the case. I'll get a screenshot of the slots trundling past the junction. Yeah, I know. Obviously, I know like the Pacific Surfliner and like the Capital Corridor trains use cab cars. I think that lot, but those two are both part of like the. I think they're both part of the Amtrak California sub-brand. And from what I gather, the Coast Starlight isn't. I'm pretty sure the Coast Starlight is. I know that goes out of Los Angeles, but wait, is that Los Angeles to Oakland or Seattle or something? Yeah, you'll have to forgive my ignorance because yeah, my knowledge on like this where some Amtrak trains go is very limited. I mean, obviously I know about like where the Northeast Corridor services go to and from, and obviously the Pacific Surfliner, but and the Piedmont as well. Come to think of it, I know even less about MBTA than I do with Amtrak, which is saying a lot. Although I do know that in real life, MBTA doesn't just use these single-decker coaches. They do also have double-deckers, which I think they're called like BTC-4 or CTC-4. Hello, there's another train away. I think that other train just passed. I think that lot might be going back towards Stoughton. Anyway, yeah, I do know that. That I think the funny thing is, like from what I've seen of footage of the real MBTA trains, quite often you'll see like one or two single-decker coaches in amongst like 5 or like 4 or 5 of the double-decker coaches, and I just think that's really fascinating, especially since in New Zealand our loading gauge is far too small to allow for double-decker stop, and that's partly because our track gauge is 3 foot 6 inch instead of 4 foot 8.5 inch as it is here. But I know that of course there's the two main central stations in Boston, which are like Boston North and Boston South, and obviously there's these services that go south to places like, I think obviously Providence, and by extension Whitford Junction, as well as Stoughton. And then there's the Franklin line that branches off at Reedville. I think the Needham Market line that branches off at Forest Hills. This brake hiss is really starting to annoy me. It seems to only happen when you've got the brakes, or when you've actually got the brakes on. Good thing it doesn't happen. Good thing you don't get that hiss when the brakes are released. Now anyway, we're coming up on Route 128 station, which is also served by Amtrak. And yeah, it's one of only 2 stations between Providence and Boston South that are served by the Northeast Regional. The other one, of course, is Boston Back Bay. But yeah, I know nothing about like where the other MBTA lines are. Like, I think I know where some of them are, like is it Framingham and Worcester line? I only know of that line because of the YouTuber Worldwide Railfan. Because I've seen a few videos of his where he's filmed like rare train movements on the Worcester line. And I do know that these Worcester trains leave from Boston South. Because there was one time where I did filmed the TSW rail fanning video at Boston South, and I think, as well as all like the regular Providence and Stoughton trains, I think I also caught one that was going to that looked as though it was going to Worcester. That's curious. There's no independent brake on the cab car. Although I suppose that makes sense because I think independent brakes are used on locomotives, and I think from memory, I think the purpose of the independent brake is so that can primarily be used when the locomotive is running light engine and is not strong enough to slow down and stop a heavy train. Just realised that this cab interior here kind of reminds me of the Long Island Railroad N7. Although I suppose in the N7's case it's a lot more refined than it is here. While it's on my mind, I might get another shot of the engine. Yeah, although I didn't show it before I started the recording, I did have to run back to the locomotive's cab before we left Stoughton, so that I could get the tail lights on. Because annoyingly, when you spawn in timetable mode, for some reason it doesn't. The tail lights are off by default, and you don't get enough time to run back and switch them on. Okay, there goes another MBTA train. Wouldn't mind betting that lot's going to Providence. Or possibly, I suppose in real life it would probably continue to Wickford Junction as well. Which begs the question, why... it's not really a question, but it's something I just don't understand. Like, why is Wickford Junction not included on this route? When, from what I've seen, even in the departure boards that you see at Boston South, it will say that the train's going to Wickford Junction, even though in the game you can only drive as far south as Providence. Like, considering that Dovetail obviously did acknowledge the existence of Wickford Junction, I'm not sure why they didn't extend it south of Providence, extend the route south of Providence. I can't remember if I've... That's interesting. I thought I'd closed those windows much earlier. Oh well, got a fair way to go before we get to the Boston Back Bay, so hopefully that'll give us enough space to crack along at least 100 miles an hour. So I think one of the more recent times when I tried this, I think I was only up to about 90 by the time we got to Forest Hills. And if you look to the right, you'll see a pair of CSX MP15 DCs. And that's a mod, and I'll post the link to that in the description. So this is obviously coming up on Reedville Yard. But yeah, you see these all these wagons here, and you wonder why there's no timetable mode services for them. They just sit there. They just sit there the whole time, and they essentially do nothing. Although I have found that if you get into the CSX engines, when you just spawn in on foot, you can actually set them up and just drive them up and down the yard. Hello. So these doors are open, but there's no platform here. How does that make any sense? Think off to the right, about here. Yeah, I think somewhere over that way, I think there's a yard where MBTA stores some of their trains. I think you can spawn in there, like in timetable mode, but I haven't tried it yet, or rather I haven't thought to try it. Right, looks like I can see Hyde Park station in the distance. So I do remember that Reedville and Hyde Park stations are very close together, and the next station we'll pass through is Forest Hills, but of course none of the Providence, Stoughton or Franklin trains actually stop there. And yeah, as you can see now, rapidly approaching 90 miles an hour, and I'm just, yeah, this is an example of what I think I might have been alluding to earlier, is that this Stoughton to Boston run is quite fascinating, because you have the combination of meandering along the rural, almost rural branch line, going no faster than 40 miles an hour, and then when you're actually north of Canton Junction, you're able to absolutely book it along the main line. And yeah, there was one time I think where I was able to get this lot up to and actually past 100 miles an hour when I was driving down to Stoughton. I'm trying to think if there's any passenger train routes in New Zealand that are comparable to that. The closest I can think of is probably the service from Britomart to Tauranga in the city of Auckland. Because even though obviously your trains in New Zealand don't go anywhere near 100 miles an hour or 160 kilometres an hour, it is that Britomart to Tauranga run is kind of a similar length to this, like in terms of duration, to this Stoughton run. And look, we're doing the ton. But the thing with the Auckland run is that you start out in the city at the underground Britomart station, which opened in 2003. And then, for the most part, you're going down a busy double-track main line, stopping at I think about 2 or 3 of the stations on the way. And then when you get to Penrose, you swing off the main line, and then you go along this meandering single-track branch down to the terminus at Tauranga. And that section is certainly very different from the rest of the Auckland network. Right, I think now we're on that section where we run parallel to MBTA subway lines, or one of the subway lines at least. That'd be pretty impressive if Dovetail had added AI subway trains. It's kind of like what I remember I think G-Trax did when they did the Sacramento Northern route train simulator. Because they obviously had the main focus of the route was the drivable Sacramento Northern equipment, so the interurban cars and the steeple cab electric locomotive. But they also added AI-only variants of like the key system and interurban electric railway units. Hello, oh, it's another MBTA. It's kind of curious that we haven't actually seen a single Amtrak service so far. Yeah, this run has actually gone by a lot faster than I thought it would. I mean, obviously we're running late, but I think we're due into Boston. We're due into Boston South in 10 minutes, but we'll probably get there about like 3 or 4 minutes late. Although one time I think I did do one of these Stoughton to Boston services, and I ended up being stuck in Back Bay because of a glitched red signal that was caused by AI trains that for whatever reason were refusing to move. And yeah, when that sort of thing happens, it is very annoying. And it looks like this station we're passing is Ruggles with a train looking like it's slowing down to stop. Let's see if we can find which one, where that one's going. Okay, Providence. Oh, it's the Needham. Oh, Needham Heights. That's what it was called. That'll be the service that stops at Forest Hills. But yeah, I was confused and thought it was Needham Market. But obviously, I've got that confused with the station in England. Concentrating on slowing down or attempting to slow down to this 30-mile-an-hour speed limit in time. So don't want to end up like those two Amtrak F40s in 1990 when they tipped over and crashed into another MBTA train, which resulted in the scrapping of, or obviously several injuries, and the scrapping of MBTA F40 PH-2C number 1073. The one I obviously haven't thought to mention it yet, but the F40 that we've got on this service is number 1054. And the cab car is number 1508. There's yet another MBTA train. Mind you, this is meant to be like this time of the day. I think it is basically the evening rush hour. So you would expect the railway to be very busy. Even though I saw that in the 24-hour schedule that Dovetail provided with this route, I noticed that the schedule for like the Stoughton services was a bit sporadic. If that's the right word. Like, it wasn't a regular, like, every, like, hourly or half-hourly service. It's kind of like the schedule that they did for the Long Island Railroad, except in that instance, that schedule was completely unrealistic. Whereas, for all I know, that sporadic schedule for the Stoughton branch probably is accurate. Yeah, we're back at Back Bay, which I've always thought was quite a fascinating station, because at one end you've got this big overall roof, and then at the other it feels like an underground station. Like, I don't know any other station that has this kind of setup. Right, obviously didn't hang around for too long, so get the doors closed and we'll head off again. Yeah, the station, of course, is also served by Amtrak's Acela and Northeast Regional services, and yeah, I think the Lakeshore Limited as well. Although the Amtrak train that derailed in that tunnel in 1990, I seem to recall that was the Night Owl. I think the accident happened either late at night, either in the night or early in the morning. So obviously it's pretty slow going from here to Boston South, and yeah, I mean, it is just it really is a fascinating route, this one. even though I still think that it should have, or that there's always room for improvement. But yeah, what we've got as it stands now is pretty good, I think. I remember, I think it was Transit Fan Productions, he said in a few recent comments on some of my videos that he quite enjoys this route, and I don't blame him. Actually, speaking of him, I remember I once watched his video, I think it was rail fanning with Metro North at Fordham station, which I thought was, I think is quite interesting because that'll be included on the Harlem Line DLC. And I know that in real life the the New Haven trains stop at Fordham, but that's like the only station they stop at between Harlem 125th Street and Mount Vernon East. Because on that section, I think on that section they share with the Harlem Line. Metro North, the New Haven kind of acts like an express service. Because I remember that there's a lot of other stations that you pass through when you're in Train Simulator when you're driving the M8 out to like Stamford or New Cannon or all the way to New Haven. Yeah, you pass all these other little stations that the New Haven line trains just don't stop at. And of course, I just remembered that Don't Stop is also the name of what I think is a very overrated song from Fleetwood Mac. So saying that, I think all of their songs are quite overrated. But yeah, we're not far off from Boston South, of course. Coming up on East Limits Cove interlocking. And as per usually, I've noticed that when I've come into doing inbound runs to Boston South, that I've had to stop here because of a red signal. Because I think this very short section between East Limits Cove interlocking and Boston South is, I think it is the busiest. This tiny little section, I think, is actually the busiest in this whole Boston to Providence add-on. And you can see there's another train over there on the other line. I think I'll try to get the head out left. Ah, that's why we've got the red signal. So that silly tosser over there. Although I could probably inch up to the signal at a snail's pace. Or in the case of the Class 142, a snail's pacer. That'd make a screenshot, methinks. Yeah, look, there's this F40 here in the fog on the right, and then there's this other one on the left. It really is, like, even though there's no variety with the MBTA consists in this game, it is still impressive to see so many of them, like, coming in and out of Boston South. But yeah, just look at this really densely, well, all these buildings like densely packed into a relatively small space, and compare this with Stoughton. It's just, as corny as it is to say, it's incredible. And there's yet another engine heading out. That's a point. Over here, I might see it. Yeah, there's a frigate. Pretty sure in real life there is a very old, like 18th century era frigate that is based in this area. I think it's called the USS Constitution, but don't quote me on that. But I'm pretty sure it is like some kind of 18th century vessel. Now I'm pretty sure that in real life trains, locomotives and cab cars don't blast their horns when they're coming into and out of the station, so I won't do so here, as tempting as it is to just spam the spacebar key. Just the spacebar, you don't call it a key. Yeah, it is a little weird. It is a little weird that we haven't seen a single Amtrak service throughout this whole run. Are there any in the station? Oh, there's yes, another MBTA train leaving. No, there are absolutely no Amtrak services in here. It's interesting. But yeah, I think I might have said this before about ACS-64 number 662. It's quite interesting that I find it curious how, I mean, it's fascinating, is it, as impressive as it is that Dovetail Games and Amtrak teamed up to put a TSW advert on a real locomotive. I just think that that Dovetail really should add a lot more Amtrak routes to the game, because I think as it stands now it's a bit underwhelming when the only Amtrak locomotive that we've got in the game is the ACS-64, and you can only drive it on a relatively short 43-mile section. But I think what they could do is, I don't know, like a remake of the Miami to West Palm Beach route. Like have, obviously, the full route, like Mangonia Park, all the way down to Miami. And with that, you could include like like a Genesis locomotive. Like a Genesis locomotive with like the Amfleets and Viewliners and whatever other cars they use on the Silver Star. And obviously, if you were going to do a Miami route, you would have to include tri-rail equipment, which I guess could just be like the Brookville BL36PH and those absolutely hideous Hyundai Rotem coaches. Seriously though, I mean, I get that the cab cars are designed to protect the driver in the event of a crash, but like, even so, those Hyundai Rotem cab cars are some of the ugliest like types of coaches I've ever come across. Mind you, these CTC-3 cars aren't really that much better in my opinion. Although actually no, these are like an angel compared to the Hyundai Rotem cars. But no, this is yeah, this has been a pretty enjoyable. Well, I thought it was enjoyable. But yeah, regardless, it's been a pretty fun run from Stoughton back to Boston South. And thank you for tuning in to another one of my silly TSW videos. And yeah, I hope to, well, not see you, but I hope that you'll stay tuned for more, as I obviously do upload TSW videos on quite a frequent basis. And of course I will come back to the Boston Sprinter routes when that Amtrak 662 reskin is made. For now, yeah, I think I'll just leave you with this random shot of a cab car. Unfortunately, I can't pass the horn. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.